And also we're having our brother here, Brother Ash from London, from UK, to join us and give us his experiences, to share his experiences, his wisdom with us. I think I've met you, brother, maybe a couple of times.
Yes, I
At
remember. Yeah.
in Madhuban in our headquarters. So welcome to the family here.
Nice to see you, Sister Vino, and really nice to be with you all this evening on my
Virtually, you're
side,
with
but
us.
yeah, and morning on your side.
Yeah, I think it's evening, right, for you, 6:30.
Yeah, 6:30 evening.
Okay,
Yeah.
evening workshop for you, morning workshop for us. So just a quick introduction about our sweet brother here. He's professionally, he works as a sales leader in the IT field. And he said his interest lies in learning and applying inner leadership principles to increase self-awareness and to cultivate empathy. So that's a very deep interest you have, brother. And today we get to hear that. And spiritually, he's also a student of this Rajoga meditation for the past 18 years. He has served many audiences, especially I think his goal or his favorite audience will be young adults, right? Having
Less
been a
so
young adult
nowadays, but
yourself.
I kind of put myself in that bracket still.
Yeah, actually, at our headquarters, we have special retreats that happen for young adults in December. And the 2 times that I met him was in December. So he don't be fooled by his white hair. He's actually very young, young in heart and young in personality, very bubbly and humorous as well. So there's one thing I was I remember, I recall my interaction with him is how he can be very spiritual and equally very humorous. And spiritual life is not a serious life, right, brother?
No, far from.
Yes. So today we will hear from brother. He would share. It's also a very apt topic at this point of time in all of our lives, to lose what needs to be lost and to find what needs to be found. So, brother, we'd love to hear you. We'd love to hear your experiences. Thank you.
Thank you for that lovely and warm introduction, and yeah, just really nice to be with you virtually. Yeah, and hopefully in person one day. Um, yeah, just touching on the point you made about a spiritual life shouldn't be a serious life. You know, yes, I completely agree. The one term that came to my mind was being spiritually light, and I being spiritually light, but being seriously light. And maybe some of you have heard this term, being seriously light. It's almost like an oxymoron, right? Two words that are opposed to each other in one sentence, but yet they somehow seem to be harmonious when we talk about it from a spiritual context, because in order to be light inside, we have to be serious, not a heavy seriousness, but to be serious about ourselves, to be serious about my inner world, and to really pay attention to it. So I wanted to share with you some of my experiences on this journey, particularly around this topic of lightening the heart and being free from the weight of my past. And one of the things that I can recognize in the world around us at the moment is that there is a lot of violence, there is a lot of suffering, and we seem to have reached a new level to which people are suffering. And one of the reasons, I guess, that violence continues to exist for me is because we're not awake to our own suffering. And this is such a big thing, to be awake to my own suffering, because when I become awake to my own suffering, that's when I can really truly be compassionate to myself, to others. And so this connection between being awake to my suffering and opening that door of compassion is something that I'd like to explore this evening in our topic. And I guess we've become so accustomed in this false identity that we can carry around with us, the ego, where we begin to absorb a lot of our suffering, and this suffering then tends to kind of turn inwards and create all sorts of diseases in our bodies, all sorts of discomfort inside. And we become so accustomed, it's almost like a habit to carry pain and to survive with pain constantly, particularly this inner pain that I talk about, this pain that sits in our hearts and can linger for years, decades, right from childhood, and we're not able to address it at the level of the root. And so we address it and deal with it at a superficial level. We deal with it by perhaps running away from it. We deal with it by perhaps distracting ourselves. We deal with it perhaps by addicting ourselves and being obsessed in different ways so that we don't have to turn ourselves inside and to create that relationship with our hearts that our hearts truly want. So my sense is that I want to share with you today a very simple process that can allow us to take ourselves on a journey inside, and really begin to pay attention to that voice of the heart, not the voice of the mind. And I'd point to the heart, not in a physical way, because we feel it physically here, but I mean the heart of the soul. And so my experiences have largely been on this path, have been focused around and centered around this topic of the heart, because I believe that it is really at the core of how everything else operates, how my inner machinery begins to work. If the heart doesn't feel right, the mind will not feel right. The intellect will not know what decisions to make. And if the heart continues to be blocked in some way, then my conscience won't work properly. So the inner mechanics of all of the instruments that work inside, they can't work properly until there is balance and cleanliness in my heart. And we'll explore this term cleanliness in a bit more detail today. But I guess one of the experiences that really came to mind about being awake to suffering for me started when this was a number of years ago, where I was really honored to have been invited to a friend's kind of, how can I say it? He had an after school club for young children between the ages of 7 and 10. And he really wanted to introduce some spiritual concepts to these young people in a way that they could really understand and digest for themselves. And this club was just fun, right? You turn up and everyone has, everyone's playing games. There's people wanting to play table tennis. There's, some board games going on. So it was just joy and fun when I entered this stage. And I remember this one boy very clearly, and he was the life and soul of the party there. I mean, he was constantly laughing. There seemed to be so much joy on his face. And he wanted to play games with me at every step. And so we played a number of different games together. And you remember it because he had these really thick rimmed glasses, and him and his sister, they were identical. They were twins, if you like, and they both had these really thick rimmed glasses, and they were so sweet. And I think they were probably about 7 or 8. And in the end of this process, I was invited to give a meditation commentary. So I started speaking about thoughts, about being aware of our thoughts and really paying attention to our thoughts. And then this young boy with his sister came up to me afterwards, and he said, I have some very horrible thoughts. Can I speak to you about this? And I was taken aback by this situation because, when we talk, we're not necessarily aware how much people are picking up from what we're saying. And this young boy had picked up a lot from what I'd shared in 2 or 3 minutes. And he sat down, and the first thing that he said to me was, my thoughts are hurting me. My mum has left my dad has left my mum, and I think my mum is going to leave me. And you could just see him pour out his life in that way. And he says, I have horrible thoughts that, you know, my dad my dad will never come back, and my mum will leave me too. And all of a sudden, in that moment, he started trembling and crying uncontrollably. And in that space, I was in meditation, just observing the scene in front of me. And what I could see was being released in front of me was some huge and significant level of trauma and suffering that were taking place in this boy. And he cried nonstop for 20 minutes. 20 minutes. He couldn't even stand. And it's one of the reflections that I had on that evening, actually two reflections. One was I felt incredibly privileged to have been given that opportunity by the divine, by the universe, to have been in a situation where this young boy could share something that was so deeply rooted in his heart, that level of suffering, and to have been liberated from what he was actually holding in his heart. Because we don't know what we carry. We're not awake to what we carry until we release it. And this is the experience I've had in my own life, in the situations that I have been released from my distant past that have been very heavy, and also situations that I've been released from my recent past. And we can explore these two dimensions of how we can begin to unearth what is going on in our hearts and to slowly begin to work and allow it to release. I often find that, you know, we tend to run a number of retreats at the Global Retreat Center. And about, I'd say 15 years ago, we started running retreats for young people, particularly because we wanted to guide them through a very specific process where they could come and they could find a space of safety where they could begin to go through a process of internal inquiry. And I want to share some of the steps to this process because it will really highlight to the extent within a short space of time, if we did the right things in the right order, then we can really begin to experience success. And by success, I mean begin to release what is hurting us. And I think this aspect of reclaiming our hearts is something that maybe it's conditioning, maybe we've experienced so much pain that we don't necessarily want to go there. But in order to begin to reclaim our hearts, we have to begin to understand how we feel. And understanding these deeply rooted feelings that I may have ignored for so long from my recent past, from my distant past, is the key, absolute key to starting to open that door to a relationship with myself. Because until that happens, there will constantly be a disconnect between the head and the heart. And the more we become disconnected, the greater the inner anger and self-rejection. I'm going to repeat that. The more we remain disconnected, head and heart remains disconnected, then the more inner anger and self-rejection increases, until such time that we experience, the mind breaks. You know, we experience a sense of brokenness in our lives, and we're unable to work with it effectively anymore without the reliance of medication and therapy. And I think maybe a few years ago, maybe 10 or so years ago, we could live in a world where we could deny our feelings and put on a strong face and work in that way, where we just shut that side of ourselves down. But I think in the current world that we live in, that is not possible anymore. because we've got the pervasive negative energy around us that is simply compounding whatever we're feeling internally. And not just that, but it's creating a stormy environment and revealing all of our insecurities and deeper feelings. And I think COVID was a perfect example of that, where we were so fixated in our own routines that we didn't really have to pay attention to ourselves on the inside, or maybe hadn't been paying as much attention to ourselves on the inside. And then all of a sudden, something comes to rock our world. Our routines change. We have to spend a lot more time in isolation and in ourselves. And all of a sudden, old stuff begins to erupt inside of us and begins to emerge. And so I recognize that often. I like the quote on the LA website, something along the lines of some need silence to sleep, but some people need silence silence is needed to awaken. I think something along those lines. And I really appreciated that quote, because the journey to work with myself on the inside starts with silence, and starts with beginning to understand my true nature. And this comes from understanding. So there's knowledge in recognizing that I am a being of peace. I am the soul, and I am living an existence through this physical body, which is matter, right? And so the expression of the soul is carried out physically. You may see this physical body, but actually it's the soul that is animating this. And this experience allows me to touch that place of peace and silence with myself. And then when I increase and strengthen that silence, that's when healing can begin to take place. So this silence is an active silence, a silence that allows us to move from absorbing the negativity around us into observing. And that's the biggest distinction, is that the more we begin to practice this type of meditation that allows us to connect with our highest selves, we become much more observant. And by observant, I mean we become detached. And it's interesting because observation is a very, very powerful skill. I think Krishnamurti said, to observe without evaluation is the highest form of intelligence. It was a very profound quote that he mentioned. You know, I think we've all heard of this expression: to observe without evaluation is the highest form of intelligence. And I recognize that when we're trapped in our egos, observation is very, very difficult, particularly this type of peaceful observation, where we're able to emerge a sense of truth in what we're observing. And that sense of truth allows us to see everything as it is, but without reaction, but also from a peaceful space. And that is, I use the term pure observation, where our innate qualities allow us to observe from a space of truth. And this allows us to be free from judgment. And I think on the healing journey, one of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves is to stop judging ourselves. And this self-judgment, this self-criticism absolutely kills us, to a point where when we try and be honest with ourselves, we can't. Because where the ego is active, then actually we will not be able to see ourselves with honesty. Deep honesty requires our egos to completely down tool, just completely dissolve. And then we're able to connect with our higher selves, and then really we're able to understand and see what is happening inside my inner world with that clarity, with that truth, with that honesty. And I think developing a relationship with myself based on honesty, for me, is the start of me loving myself. And this is what I have experienced in my own journey, recognizing that for a long time, for many years, I avoided myself. I dismissed myself. I criticized myself. And I didn't quite realize that all of these things that I was doing I ignored myself. All of these things that I was doing was simply self-rejection. I was rejecting myself. And self-rejection is an amazing form of anger. It's very powerful because we can recognize anger externally and we can immediately correct ourselves or think, yes, I have been angry here and that's not right. But this internal anger that we can carry it for so long and it just wears us down. First of all, it destroys any happiness that we have. Second, we begin to become depleted energetically. And this form of anger tends to sit in our hearts. You know, the sorts of deep feelings that exist in our hearts, things like sadness, regret, guilt, shame, you know, being hard on myself, disheartenment. These are deep forms of inner anger, anger directed within. And when this form of anger exists, it can exist for years. We can carry it for years. And we come and meditate, create that peaceful space. But these deeper feelings that are rooted inside of us are connected to memories from our distant past, from our recent past, that unless we shift, they begin to pollute our awareness repeatedly. And so we may fill ourselves with some power when we come to meditate, but that power begins to dissipate because we are not able to get to that root. We're not able to give voice to those feelings so that we can truly understand what their root is. And sometimes, and actually often, I find that perhaps we just don't know where to start. And I know that for a long time in my life, I didn't know how to start. Nobody had really spoken to me about the language of feelings and to really understand and reframe what feelings are. You know, I think someone once said to me, and it's really powerful when they said this, see feelings as a messenger that says that the soul is hurting. And if we work with feelings at that level, then we can stop rejecting our feelings. We can start accepting these signals and begin to take responsibility. But when we're caught up in the shadow of our egos, ultimately we're programmed to think other people are responsible for the way I feel. And so we don't take any self-responsibility for my inner world. We allow that pain and we go one step beyond that. We begin to blame others for the way we feel. And so we're unable to really look within, see what's happening in our own world, but instead we project blame. You are responsible for the way I feel. And I feel this deep inner conditioning of this outside in sense of respect is what's creating a huge level of turbulence in our lives. Because when everything around us has to be okay in order for us to feel okay inside, everything around us is now becoming uncertain, is now becoming unstable. And therefore, our feelings are constantly rocked. And so when other people are responsible for the way we feel, we're not able to really see what's in our own lives. We're not really truly able to begin the journey of healing and letting go. And I feel that there is, the first step, I guess, to being awake to my suffering. I feel we have to understand where we are with our suffering. And by that, I'm going to show you a slide and hopefully gauge some of your responses as I post this. Is everyone with me so far? If you've got any questions, please feel free to add them to the chat, and then at one point I can really begin to respond to those. But I'm hoping everything that I've shared resonates and you can relate to this. So bear with me a second. I'm just going to share my screen. Oh, I think I've given the answers away. Okay. Hopefully you didn't see all of that. Okay, so we have a blank screen. And I wanted to, first of all, just ask you what that image represented. So sometimes we can be suffering, but we do that. What does that mean to you? If you can, thoughts on a postcard, as they say here, but we could have thoughts on the chat instead.
To hide.
To hide, yes, yeah. Hiding my face from others, yeah.
An
What else is
ostrich.
it? Yeah. Burying my head in the sand. Okay. Blinding self. Interesting. Thank you.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Out of sight, out of mind. Yeah, very, very good. Okay. So what is one phrase that we can use to capture that scene? I think some of you already mentioned that. If you can just write one word, or two words it is, if you can think of it. Hopeless. Giving up.
Escape.
Escape, yeah, yeah. Okay, let's see. Hiding, yeah, very close. Okay. Did we acknowledge that? In denial? So we can be in suffering, but we can be in denial. And what does in denial mean? In denial means that I'm suffering, but I don't want to know, or I don't want to go there. Has anyone been there? Is anyone there today?
I'm here right now.
Okay. So we can recognize that we're in suffering. We are suffering, but I don't want to go there and I don't want to know. Yeah. Okay. Another form of suffering is this image here. Does anybody know what this image represents?
Stuck within.
Stuck within, absolutely. What else?
Isolation.
Bottling up my feelings.
Isolation, lonely. Yeah.
Silence.
Bottling up my feelings. Yeah.
You're there, but you're not there.
Okay.
Separation.
Sorry.
Long.
Hiding from everyone.
Hiding from everyone. Okay.
We want to get out of the suffering, but like we are stuck. So we have a lot of blockages within.
Interesting. Yeah.
Trapped.
Sorry, what was the last one? I didn't hear that.
Trapped.
Absolutely. I think that is the word. That is the word. So trapped is the feeling. And what does suffering feel like when we're trapped? What is the inner voice saying to us? And we are suffering, but when we're trapped, we don't know what to do, or we don't know how to do it. Is anybody there with their suffering at this time where you feel, I don't know what to do and I don't know how to do it? So I feel trapped in my suffering.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. And it's interesting because there's another form of suffering, and that is probably worse, is the worst type of suffering, I feel. And this type of suffering is, oh, bear with me a second. Clicker stopped working. There we go. It says it on the face. It is to ignore. Yeah, where the form of suffering when I ignore is that I actually do know what I need to do, but I can't do it, won't do it, or I feel powerless to do it. Right? So I know what I need to do. I've had the guidance, I've had the instructions, but there is some internal resistance, whether I don't want to do it, I can't do it, or I feel like I'm not powerful enough to do it. And so we ignore or reject the truth that we have received, that we know to be true, but we can't follow. And I think we've all been here at some point in our life where you know the truth, but you can't follow it. And knowing the truth, but we can't follow it, creates a form of suffering inside of us because our conscience repeatedly bites. And this form of suffering where we're not able to follow our truth, I feel is a really tough form of suffering, because it just wears us down, where we know what we need to do, but we just can't do it. And so in my life, I've kind of compartmentalized suffering in these three ways. And I recognize that depending on our stage in life, and by stage in life, I mean the level of spiritual power we have at a particular point in time, the magnitude of the situation and the challenge that we're facing, we will oscillate in one of these three areas. Yeah, sometimes we will stay trapped over a long period of time, and we're unable to really find a way out of our suffering. Sometimes we will just stay in denial, and actually, you know, we'll survive life. We know we're suffering, we know it's depleting us, but we're just dragging our knuckles through life and finding it taking us day by day, but we are living in complete unhappiness. And so I think depending on where we are in life and what we're facing, we will find ourselves in one of these three pots somewhere or another. And so I think that first step of acknowledging my suffering is a big thing, because without that level of self-acknowledgement, I don't think it's possible for us to really move into this next phase where we can begin to take ourselves seriously. So this aspect that I talked about, being seriously light, you know, when we begin to take ourselves seriously physically, what do? We prepare ourselves, don't we? We say we're going to start an exercise routine, we begin a fast, or we begin a healthy regime where we cut out the stuff that is wasteful, that is negative, that begins to create toxins in our life, and we start creating the habits where we can ingest food or drink that is pure, exercise the body, sleep early. So we begin to do the things that physically will allow us to regenerate. So we take ourselves seriously at a physical level. But what does it mean to then take ourselves seriously at a spiritual level? And the first thing I can say is we have to give ourselves time. But the second thing, we have to make ourselves the priority. And I often know that, you know, when I'm teaching the Raj Yoga course and I talk about integration of lifestyle, you know, like we have integration of you know, best practices or healthy practices when we're trying to live physically, there are certain practices that will really help us spiritually, that will really nourish us spiritually. And, you know, people talk about integration, people talk about, you know, kind of finding, emerging or managing those elements in their life. But actually what I mean by integration is prioritizing them, because we can begin, until we begin to change the patterns that cause our suffering internally, because these patterns exist on the inside, we can never truly change our lives if we continue living the same way and then go to a meditation center, have a nice meditation, and then go back to living life as we do, right? With the same patterns of thinking, with the same patterns of behavior that create our own suffering. But when we begin to prioritize ourselves, what we're saying is the basis and the foundation of my life starts with my practices to secure my mind and to cleanse my heart. When I take those very, very seriously, then I begin to move through life with a different mindset, with a different awareness, with an awareness that says, I am preserving my inner peace. I'm preserving my inner self-respect, my self-respect of non-violence in every way. And that then preserves my strength, my spiritual strength. Not just preserves it, it begins to accumulate. Because as I begin to be rooted in my spiritual self-respect, then actually I move from a space of violence where I go from judging somebody, judging myself, being critical, being hard, being sensitive, to actually maintaining my inner peace in situations and being non-violent. So I begin to observe people on the basis of truth. And so the interesting thing is we move from this position of absorbing what's around us to being detached, but seeing everything clearly. And this term detached, we use it quite regularly here in the Brahma Kumaris, and sometimes it can seem like a very cold word, but actually detachment is nothing more than observation with pure presence, where I'm so engaged in the present moment, but I'm one step back. I can see everything with the bigger picture. And I think when we're suffering, we lose sight of that. We move into a space of confusion. We move into a space of overanalyzing. We move into a space of inaction, you know, and I think most of us can probably recognize that when we've been suffering for long periods of time in our lives, then we will find ourselves procrastinating. We will find ourselves lacking self-trust, lacking the ability to discern what is right, what is wrong, unable to make simple decisions, becoming very confused, becoming very sensitive, and we become stagnant. We kind of feel as though we're just surviving life. We're unable to really live it. So I think when we're seeing these sorts of signs in our inner world, where I'm just not able to function on a daily basis in what could be simple matters, then these are subtle signs that there is a huge spiritual block in my heart. And the process of heart cleansing and to release ourselves from this unhappiness is really such a powerful and important phase that we have to put ourselves in, that we have to begin to take seriously, because nobody else is going to be able to guide us through this. Nobody else is going to understand what is happening in our inner worlds like we can. And the starting point of this is simply to give myself that priority and to create a routine for my self-care that allows me to acknowledge what's happening inside in my mind and what's happening in my heart, but not just acknowledge it, begin to pay attention to it. And that can come in a number of different forms, right? When I can acknowledge my suffering, then I can begin to respond to my suffering with care. And what does respond to my suffering with care mean? It is simply self-compassion. It is simply paying attention to my inner world. Excuse me. And, you know, one of the first ways that we can begin to pay attention to our inner world is start to attend events where there is a higher vibration of exchange, where we talk about positive and spiritual aspects, much like gatherings like this, coming to meditation centers. So surrounding myself in a higher vibrational state and atmosphere allows the soul that starting step to begin to respond to my suffering with care, doing something for myself, appreciating myself, beginning to journal and acknowledge my feelings, and consciously cutting out the things that are creating negative energy in my life, whether it's people, whether it's habits. You know, this is what it means to then begin to take myself seriously, when I'm able to press pause on that which is not important outside and start paying attention to everything on the inside, whilst we have control of our minds, whilst we can consciously make those decisions. When the separation begins to drop into depression, the separation between head and heart swings us into depression, then we're beginning to lose the capacity to work with our minds by ourselves. We then need external help to get there. But whilst we have the ability to understand our own suffering, then let us respond to it. You know, I think the analogy I use, you know, because human beings have a natural capacity for compassion. We recognize that in ourselves. You know, if, for example, you saw someone you love suffer or hurt in some way, our natural tendency would be to go and put an arm around that person or to somehow console that person. That would be instinctive. as human nature. So our core qualities point to the fact that by default, we wouldn't think, we would just act in that situation. And that shows we have a natural capacity of compassion. That shows that actually our natural state is one of goodness. But I think the other thing to bear in mind is to recognize that, you know, if we were to, for example, trap your hand in a door, then what would our response be immediately? Any thoughts? How would we respond to trapping our hand in a door when we're hurting physically? What would we do? We would start to caress our hand, wouldn't we? We would maybe put some lotion on it just to kind of help it heal and soothe it, almost put some balm on it, right? Rub it, you know, give it a loving touch. We would do all of these things, right? So this is us responding to physical pain with care. But when we're suffering internally, why don't we use the same compassion as we do physically? Why don't we turn it inwards? Yeah. Maybe we don't know how. Maybe we're so used to living in this way and surviving ourselves through it that it's okay, I can just live another day and just get through it somehow. But there reaches a point where we all get to a stage where perhaps we begin to feel brokenness in our lives. And this term brokenness is a big thing. You know, I've experienced this myself. I have witnessed so many people around me experience brokenness, which is a severe state of disheartenment and worthlessness, where when that state arrives, it becomes so difficult to begin to do any work on ourselves. You know, we lack the power and we lack the guidance, and we're just unable to see or find solutions to whatever challenges and problems we have. We feel lost. Can anyone relate to this?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, definitely.
Yes.
Thank you. And so some of the practices I want to share with you, we'll move now into the practices phase. Okay, so I suppose I was at that point where I was just going to take you through, you know, kind of some of the things that we did. And there were the 4 particular steps, yeah, and I'll just take you through them. So the first one we've covered. In order to start my journey inwards, I have to acknowledge where I'm at. Am I in denial? Am I trapped, or am I ignoring what I have received and not acting upon it? And the 4 steps that follow this. Firstly, we talked about compassion. So I want to say that when we're suffering, our consciousness is down here, low consciousness. And we've all heard this law where I think it was Albert Einstein said it, where no problem can be solved from the consciousness that created it. Now, the proof I can give you of this is maybe something's affecting you in life. Maybe somebody's upset you, and you know you're carrying the hurt of that in your life. One of the first things we tend to do is to begin to analyze the situation, right? And analysis tends to lead us to paralysis. Has anyone been there where they recognize that I'm analyzing this and I'm just going round and round in circles, and I just feel so mentally zapped and exhausted that at the end of the day, I need to free my mind. Has anybody been there, or is there at this stage?
Yes, I'm an overthinker.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So that's clearly one of the things that happens to us when we are suffering and we are beginning to think about a situation, and we spend so much waste thoughts. And I'll tell you what's happening there. What is happening is I have taken pain, yeah, and in that pain is now projecting, or I will use a stronger term, vomiting into my mind. So we hear this word vomit, and we know that it's kind of releasing stuff from the inside out, and it will just come out, right? And exactly that is happening into my mind. So when I've absorbed pain in my heart or taken sorrow in some way, then that pain in my heart begins to project in my mind in the form of wasteful thinking. And this leaves our mind out of control. We will be in a situation 1 minute, and the next minute we will get into our car and be starting to drive somewhere, but all we will do is we will keep going back to that situation in the past in various forms. We will think about what they said, we will think about what we want to say to them, and we will begin to inflict pain in the scenes in our mind whilst we're driving home, right? We've all been there, right? And we've heard this term road rage. It's a big thing here in the UK, but that's when all of the stuff inside is beginning to work in our own minds. So the past is becoming present in our own minds, and our attitudes are becoming more and more hostile. We're creating a hostile energy. We get home and our loved ones open the door, and it doesn't take us long to erupt, right? I don't know if anyone's been there, but I'll put my hand up and say I definitely have. When all of the stuff that is hurting inside of us projects in our minds in an uncontrollable way, creates a wave of uncontrollable feelings that then we become like walking pressure cookers. And then we just need to be in a safe environment, and someone says something very little for all of that to erupt in an unreasonable way. I'm hoping I'm not alone. I'm sure most of you have probably experienced that at some point in your life. But in this way, yeah, thank you for raising your hand. But in this way, we're not able to solve the problem. We analyze it, and there's a big difference between analyzing a problem and reflecting on that problem. And reflection allows us to observe a situation. So we're able to observe our reaction. We're able to observe the situation clearly and cleanly without emotion. That is reflection. And reflection requires us to spend time with ourselves and ask ourselves questions. So this step of when we first see a group come to our retreats, the first thing we do before we get to the reflection phase is to raise that consciousness. You know, when I was saying that when we're suffering, our consciousness is down here. But in order to start working with ourselves, we can't work with ourselves at this level. We can't be honest at this level. We need to raise our consciousness here. And so the first thing we do is we bathe them in meditation, but we make them feel at home and give them such a sense of love and kindness that actually their egos begin to dissolve. And then we begin to work with them so that they can begin to see their own value. Because what happens in our own suffering is we suffer alone. And when we suffer alone, we do not see our specialities or qualities. We begin to lose sight of anything good inside of us, and our suffering dominates us. It creates a feeling of worthlessness inside. So we have to pick ourselves back up again and balance the scales, because if the scales aren't balanced, if we're not able to see ourselves dispassionately or objectively without emotion, then we can't see the good and the bad equally. We're only ever seeing one. We're only seeing one higher than the other. There is no value in me. And in this way, we can't work with ourselves. So when we're raising our consciousness, we start to focus only on that which is good, and releasing and just ignoring for the time being that which is negative and creating challenges in our life, because at that point, our consciousness begins to raise. We're able to slowly open and understand that actually we've just lost a bit of balance here. I'm not all bad. There is goodness in me here somewhere. And I can begin to appreciate myself and spend time with myself in this way. And that's when I can start to develop a relationship with my own goodness. I can start to begin to see that actually I can use the good inside of me to affect the situations that are challenging me. That is empowerment. That is knowing that I have got something of value inside that I can use to bring a solution to whatever I'm facing externally. So that first step of love, and love is important, because without love, without a space of safety and protection, ego will always exist. Ego will see threat. So where there is love, ego will dissolve. And it is necessary for ego to dissolve so that we can begin to work with ourselves with truth, because by its very nature, ego is false, and ego won't allow us to respond honestly. It is the difference between understanding and realization. In ego, I can understand that I've done something wrong, but I won't change. But at the level of the soul, when I realize something has happened, then realization in itself is forgiveness. And that is liberation. That allows that aha moment deep inside to take place, where it says, the voice inside says, I do not wish for this any longer. And that voice begins to propel us to take the steps we need to change our lives. That is the power of realization. Understanding is a different energy. It doesn't propel us to change. Realization does. And realization requires truth. Realization requires love. Realization requires the silence to connect with ourselves. So that first step of love is important. The second step of reflection is important. And so we have a second session where we ask the group particular questions, so that they can reflect on a situation in their present life that is creating distress. We always only focus on the present moment, because the present moment shows us what aspects of the past are being triggered inside of my consciousness. And so that allows me to begin to do the work on myself. That begins to act as a pointer to what is it triggering from my distant past, from the old stuff that's coming up. And so when we're able to use the triggers of the present moment to unearth what is happening deep within, healing can begin to take place. That's when we can begin to understand. And understanding is important in this way, because until we understand something, we cannot accept it. It's the simple law, right? We have to understand in order to accept. And when we understand something and we accept it deeply, we release ourselves from a lot of tension, a lot of inner resistance. And when we've achieved that self-acceptance, it is what it is. We accept the situation for what it is. That is the start of becoming free. Yeah, so we can use many tools. Writing is one of the most powerful tools that I've employed myself in my spiritual journey, where I have acknowledged my feelings on a nightly basis, truthfully. And I've acknowledged my feelings with the divine. I have written about exactly what is going on in my heart, not to fix it, but to be truthful about it. Because when I can accept that, then it will change. I don't have to fix anything. Ego is focused on fixing things because it doesn't want to understand. It just wants to move on. Whereas the soul wants to learn. The soul wants to take benefit. And the soul wants to realize and let go and move on. And so the process of reflection is vital. And you will find no better tool than writing. If you journaled about your feelings for 5 minutes every night and another 5 minutes to appreciate yourselves, within 2 weeks of that honest acknowledgement, you would feel different about yourselves. The relationship you have formed will be so close. You will begin to accept yourselves. And so I find that this second session is pivotal because it begins to unearth truth. And that is an important layer to healing. The third part of the process is letting go. And letting go is one of my favorite sessions that we run. We run it in a meditative way, in a meditative space, because we're guiding these souls to come. Sometimes there's almost 70 of them in a room, in a meditative process to really begin to release what they've discovered in the previous session in reflection. And what I mean by releasing, and often this meditative process is followed by another form of writing where they simply just write everything that's coming from their heart. And this is an interesting form of writing because when you are able to write from a space of your heart, then actually everything will just flow. You won't have to think. It will be like everything is just effortlessly coming out and my mind is quiet. What is happening here? And often when you write from your head, you will stop start. You will try and change the word to make it more flowery, like you're writing a bestseller. You will try and phrase it something differently. But actually, the heart speaks in very simple ways. It will make spelling mistakes. You will write in scribbles. It will just flow. And as it's flowing, your mind is still, but the weight is being lifted. The weight is being released. And so often I find that almost half the group, if not 2/3 sometimes, is in tears during this exercise, because it really is unburdening whatever they've been experienced, just like that little boy was sharing with me at a certain point in his life. The group tends to unburden themselves through this process of writing. And then we have kind of a burning ceremony where, when the past is the past, it is the past. It's gone. It's burnt. There is no point revisiting it. There is no point bringing it back alive in any way. To be free from my past means my intellect and my mind is no longer pulled by the past. And that is a sign of freedom. That is a sign of lightness. That is a sign that I have moved on in life. And the title for our talk this evening is a very powerful title, because lose what needs to be lost in order to find what needs to be found can only take place when I've created space by releasing my consciousness from anything that's pulling me down. Because when my consciousness has been pulled down, newness cannot come anywhere near you. It is not possible to manifest new directions in life simply because there isn't the determination, there isn't the willpower, there isn't the energy to progress that, because the heaviness of what's in our hearts is like an anchor. It locks our mind, it locks our ability to think, it locks our ability to attract in every single way. So the cleansing of our hearts opens that door. The sparkle returns. It's almost like energy comes back into the soul again, and the soul begins to shine again. And I'll tell you something, we always have like an entertainment evening after the letting go exercise, and they're all bouncing off the walls. You could just see the sparkle on their faces, because it's almost like the weight of the world has been lifted off their shoulders, and the soul is able to function again. We're able to find new direction. And often it's 6 months down the line that we tend to hear back from some of these recipients, where they contact us and say, some incredible things like, they found major new directions in life. They found a purpose in life that they never thought that they could ever have. They've been able to trust the feelings they had before they came with conviction to channel themselves in the right way. So all sorts of newness begins to come in our life when the consciousness begins to open. And so new directions comes automatically to us when we release ourselves from the old dead weight that's been sitting there and that continues to sit there constantly. And letting go should be a daily exercise. It shouldn't be something we do once a year or once every 10 years. It should be a daily practice, because if we think about something, each event that's taken place in our life, each interaction that's taken place in our life where we have taken sorrow. So the first law of spirituality, or the first law of non-violence, is don't give sorrow and don't take sorrow. This is the number one law that we state at the Brahma Kumaris, because that is the law of non-violence. Yet in so many scenes in our life, we've taken a lot of violence, we've taken a lot of pain. And in the subconscious, in the groove of our subconscious, we hold two things. One is we hold the event, what actually happened. And the second thing we hold is the feeling. And so often we always hear this expression, don't we? You can forget what somebody said to you, but you will never forget the way they made you feel, right? And so deep within our subconscious, there's a groove, and that groove holds the event and the feeling. And these feelings get triggered. And so it's important that each of the knots that exists in our heart related to the scenes what we've taken pain from, they need to be released. Much like we go to an acupuncturist or go to some back therapist, and they press our knots to release the tension in our backs. In the same way, we have knots in our hearts, very toxic knots that deplete us. As soon as we fill ourselves with pure water, all of that pure water turns into into mucky water until we begin to address these knots. And so when we become free from these knots, we begin to find new directions, because there's so much of our past we have yet to reconcile. And so the journey of an awakened soul, we begin to realize, is a journey of healing, really to be healed from our past and to lighten ourselves so that we can really truly come back to a sense of being that is so powerful, that is naturally present. We don't, in our true state of being soul conscious, there is only presence. We don't need to practice presence, because the state of presence comes when we have released the past. And that's when the future we don't become fearful of the future. When we've let go of our past, we've then let go of our fears of the future. We become very rooted and focused in the present moment. So I just wanted to share that in our talk today. I'll stop there, knowing that we probably want to have some time for questions and any other interactions, but I really hope what I've shared has been useful and given you some thought, which is you now need to pay attention to yourself, because each scene comes into our life and it becomes a marker to unearth something for us. And I think the biggest question we can ask ourselves as an example of journaling is, what is the significance of what I'm going through in my life at the moment in this scene? And I think your heart will speak to you in ways that you couldn't believe possible. And just taking that question alone and just journaling on that, but don't journal from it when you're feeling sad, because journaling when you're feeling sad is low consciousness journaling. Spend some time in a meditative space, spend some time maybe at the center where you can be in an environment that's lifting you first, and then where you're experiencing that inner peace. And then from that inner peace, speak to yourself, really listen to the heart. That's what reflection is, and just allow the pen to flow. And you'll be surprised what will come out. I can share with you one technique for journaling that will begin to stop the mind from worrying and allow the heart to open. And that technique is spiral writing. Now, if anybody hasn't heard of spiral writing, it's simply writing in a spiral. So as you write, you turn the page until you form a spiral. And this form of writing scrambles the brain. So it creates an automatic style of writing. And that just allows stuff to flow out. So find that space of peace first. Power up. When there's enough power in there, then actually the truth and the soul will just begin to flow out. I think I can hear truth as you were speaking, because there's a level of self-responsibility that's coming through in what you were sharing. But I feel that you can work with that. You can take that next step and just have faith that actually, because you're prepared to take responsibility, because you're prepared to maintain the intention of being honest, everything will work out. And so take that as faith and just do these simple things. So be in a high energy environment and just grab yourself a journal and just write and ask yourself very specific questions, like you would to a friend that you care for. What's bothering you? What is it that you are struggling, that you know you need to let go of, but you're struggling to? These are very powerful qualification questions we can ask ourselves. So I just wanted to pick up on Paddy's point as well, which was, can you please give an example of journaling? And journaling is a form of writing but this particular form of writing, which allows us to reflect on incidents and situations in our life in a deeper way. And the first type of reflection starts with me acknowledging my feelings. And sometimes maybe we don't have the vocabulary to describe our feelings, but the internet has. So you can certainly find types of negative feelings and just circle them. I find that really interesting, because you'll often find that there's a mixture of feelings going on. And when there's this pang of emotion running through your body and you don't understand what it is, you can't accept anything. You will only resist tension, react, and the cycle will repeat. You will deplete, and there will be more and more unhappiness. So what negative feelings or emotions is this situation creating? That's a great question to ask. Another question is, identify any specific attitudes that I'm holding, because when I'm absorbing pain, then my attitudes will be reflected of that. Awareness, attitude, there's a link. So what's in my awareness will create my attitude. If there's hostility in my awareness, or anger in my awareness, there'll be hostility in my attitude. So just begin to identify with honesty what is happening. And that way, each level of understanding creates acceptance. And the goal is, when we accept enough, then we can release ourselves from the situation that is bothering me. Is there anything that you can't let go of, but you should? And sometimes we can ask ourselves that question, because it's a very powerful question to ask ourselves. We can be hanging on to stuff. I could be attached to wanting to be right in a situation, or wanting to control somebody, or wanting to control something, or wanting to be hard on somebody. And I have to begin to understand what is it I'm letting go of, but I can't, that I should be letting go of, but I can't seem to. So actually it's pointing me to my attachments. So that's a good question to ask myself. Another question to ask myself is, what type of fear do I have? Yes, we can recognize fear, and it's, know that we are feeling fearful, but the type of fear is really interesting to observe. Is it the fear of the unknown? Is it the fear of failure? Is it the fear of losing control? Is it the fear of being trapped? Is it the fear of pain or suffering? Is it the fear of of loss or judgment? So these sorts of things can really help us understand, what is happening inside. And I think another question is, what can you accept in this situation that you can't change? Knowing what is in your control and what is out of your control. And I often find that another type of question that's really powerful is what does my higher and inner voice say to me? We are beings full of wisdom. We have a lot of truth in us, deep inside. And we just have to activate that truth, that inner wisdom exists. And the way to activate that truth is to ask myself that loving question: what does the wise heart say in this moment? And at that point, in that moment, something will speak to you. Yeah. And that will speak to you because we've absorbed a lot of wisdom, and that will just come out. And that's your guidance. That's that inner voice saying, pay attention to this. That helps transform the situation. So these sorts of questions are powerful, reflective questions. And often reflection, like I said, never do it in a low consciousness. If you're being affected, then raise your consciousness, experience that powerful atmosphere, a high vibration words, an environment where I'm able to appreciate myself, appreciate my value, and then begin to do reflection. Then we can begin to change. Okay, so we've got another question. Why do I continue to leave people or situations when I don't feel value or seeing? Why do I continue to leave people or situations when I don't feel value or seeing? Let me just replay what I think I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong by sending me a message. So I'm assuming that when you feel valueless, you find yourself isolated, in that you will tend to disconnect. Acknowledgement. I think you've unearthed something, a deep secret about yourself there, actually, that actually can take us a lifetime, and people won't see stuff like that, where I'm not able to see my value. And then as a result of that, I change the situation, or I'm not able to reveal my value and I change the situation, or I feel rejected in some way. So I suppose the way to approach this is to begin to see my own value, and to appreciate my own value for myself, and to stand in my own self-respect. And that the first value that I need to begin to appreciate and recognize isn't that I'm a skilled or talented individual. Actually, that's secondary. The first is that I'm a peaceful being, and I am full of goodness. And I can think it mentally, but until I experience that in meditation, and until I can repeatedly begin to experience the depth of that, I can't make that my truth. I can't begin to truly then value the specialities this soul has. There's qualities this soul has that makes me unique. And until I value myself, I won't have that sense of self-respect. I will always expect other people to value me. And when they don't value me, I will get upset. So again, this outside in sense of respect that the ego has created, and it's conditioning. It's a conditioning that says, I need acknowledgement from the outside in order to feel respect on the inside. But actually we reverse that in spirituality, in soul consciousness. We say, actually, I begin to see my own value, appreciate my own value, and I respect myself. And so I hope that gives some direction. And literally, it starts with me beginning just to acknowledge my own qualities and my own specialities that are cemented inside of me, what I really truly value. And when I connect with these core qualities and see that they have been solid inside of me, I'm beginning to acknowledge my own uniqueness and appreciate myself. But equally, I need to appreciate the things that I need to work on as well, you know. And a lot of it stems from acknowledging the feelings I have and acknowledging that there is self-rejection or anger inside. And when I'm able to acknowledge my anger and release myself from it, then nobody can reject me, because I'll be rooted in my self-respect and I will choose not to be angry. And that's, I don't know whether that directly answers your question, but I feel that it certainly hopefully gives some direction.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm just kind of conscious of time. Do you teach workshops to dive deeper? I do. I mean, this is best done in a retreat, you know, just to take you through a process where, you know, we often start these retreats Friday evening and finish Sunday afternoon. So in a short space of time, we can achieve major healing. So I do run workshops. I haven't got one planned anytime soon. But I think when I do, I can certainly send those details over to LA, and hopefully, you know, anyone who wants to join is more than welcome, for sure.
Would you be doing them on Zoom, or do we get to go to India?
That
That sounds like a good plan right now.
Yeah, I mean, Zoom can only take us so far in terms of our capacity to concentrate on a screen, but there's no substitute for face-to-face.
The LA on Spalding, the Brahma, would they be doing it there? Or?
I don't think so, unless they have their own retreats. But here in the UK, because I speak quite a lot to a European audience, we tend to run retreats in the UK. We've got retreat centres, so people can come to those retreat centres. I live next to one down here in Worthing, and I run silence retreats 4 or 5 times a year. And many people come to those silence retreats, and I take them through this process of heart cleansing and being free, and, you know, transformative, truly transformative. So yeah, depending on the teacher in the BK family, in the Brahmakumaris family, there could be somebody who can take you through this. Otherwise, I can send details at the right time. But I tend to run a workshop like this where I can explain concepts, but to actually take you through it practically requires a commitment to a process, and that is often best done in a retreat. Well, I can certainly send details of the next one we will hold. We haven't discussed a slot for it yet, but I can certainly send details, and if you're interested, then, you know, do sign up.
Can you repeat again about the spiral writing? What is that?
Yeah,
writing?
sure. Let me show you a picture, so I can. Okay, can you see this?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So spiral writing is literally, the brain is used to writing left to right. Yeah. And that engages the conscious mind, the mind that evaluates, judges. And so we'll stop start as we write in that way. But when you write in a spiral, whether you start on the outside and you work your way inside, or you start on the inside and work your way outside, it scrambles that brain. And so you kind of write from an automatic perspective. And it's a really powerful way to answer questions. So I gave you a series of questions earlier. If you took one of them, or even just a simple question, what's bothering you? When you just started spiraling inside out, actually you would unearth stuff that you wouldn't normally unearth if you're writing consciously left to right. It's somehow it kind of gets deeper into the subconscious and reveals what's in the subconscious. I don't know if anybody has had experience with spiral writing in the group. I'm sure maybe one or two of you have had and seen the benefit of that. But it is a powerful form of writing. And it's
Yes,
one that
brother, I've
I feel
actually done it
works.
before.
You've done it
I've done it
before,
before. Yeah.
and you've seen the benefit of that.
Yeah. You don't think actually. You don't correct your thoughts. It's just whatever that flows, you just pen it down.
It just flows, doesn't it? And did you
Yeah.
experience that lightness that came with spiral writing when you
Yeah.
release something?
And if your writing is small, then you can fit more on the page.
Yeah, of course, very true. Okay, good. So look, I think maybe we should end with a few moments of meditation. That would be great. And thank you all for joining today's talk. And yeah, do you have a website for the retreat? We have a website that we will add events to. But actually, when we do create the retreat, we'll often send out a link to register so we can circulate that at the right time. Okay, and yes, there is a recording after this. It might need to be stitched together. There were two parts. But yeah. Okay, good. So let's connect with our higher self for a couple of minutes and just find that space of stillness. And maybe ask ourselves a very powerful question as we enter the next phase of our life, the next thing that we do. Okay, so let us bring ourselves into the present just by a deep cleansing breath and release. Just ground yourself in calmness and allow the mind to be completely free and peaceful. Release any thoughts you have. And as you turn inside, just focus your attention at the center of your forehead. And become aware of yourself in this quiet room behind the eyes. I am on the inside. And the world of sound and movement continues around me. On the outside. But here, there is peace. There is stillness. There is stability. And being grounded in peace connects me to my highest nature. That nature of goodness. That nature of benevolence and kindness. It all emerges from this inner state of peace. I recognize that true healing takes place when I'm able to move from absorbing into observing. When I can begin to see everything without judgment, to see everything truthfully, clearly, from a higher consciousness. And this seeing, this acknowledging, enables me to accept, enables me to learn, and enables me to let go. Let go of that which creates heaviness in the heart. Let go of the suffering and pain that I have been holding for so long. Let me make a vow in my heart, a vow to be free from that which hurts me, that which I hold. Let me create the space in my consciousness to want to take myself seriously so that I can be light and free. Om Shanti, I am peace. Thank you.